Great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody from all over the world. I'm Noah Horowitz, Director of Americas for Art Basel. I'm thrilled really to welcome you here today to the fourth in our series of Art Basel Zoom conversations. Today we'll be looking at the subject of collecting, which is an ever-present and super important one. Now perhaps more than ever, given the challenges of our COVID environment, with so many other subjects, very pressing ones, grappling for attention, how and why to support art and how to give art a voice now is incredibly important, and something we're going to be exploring with these four amazing guests over the course of the next hour. We'll be looking with each of our panelists at some of the major topics around the world of culture, collecting, to see some trends that they may have identified, and ultimately to try to identify different trajectories that have come out of this. Without further Füsun Eczacıbaşı from Istanbul, Jill Kraus from New York City, Carlos Marsano from Lima, and Uli Sigg from Mounsey, Switzerland. Füsun, who many of you may know, is co-founder and chairperson of SAHA, the pioneering arts organization, support art, contemporary art specifically out of Turkey. She's also a member of the International Friends Documenta and the Friends of the Castello de Rivoli. She sits on Tate's International Council and Middle East Acquisition Committee and is co-chair of the New Museum in New York's International Leadership Council. Jill and her husband, Peter, have been collecting for over 40 years now. They've devoted an enormous amount of their charitable efforts both to supporting arts and education-related institutions. Jill currently serves as the chair of the board for the Public Art Fund, New York. She's also a member of the board of trustees of MoMA in New York, as well as Cal Arts, pioneering arts education and art school in LA, as well as the New Museum. Carlos began his collecting journey focusing on pre-Columbian art in the late 80s before shifting firmly into contemporary art in the early 2000s. He's a member of the International Council of the New Museum in New York and the Contemporary Art Acquisitions Committee for the Museo de Arte de Lima in Peru. In addition to this, he's also co-founder of Artists, which is a cultural initiative that grants Peruvian artists scholarships and access to international residency programs. And last but certainly not least, a man who really requires no introduction is Uli Sigg. As a collector, he's formed unquestionably the most important, substantial collection of Chinese art, Chinese contemporary art in the world. In 2012, he donated over 1,400 of those works as a foundational gift to the M+ Museum in Hong Kong. Prior to this, in 1999, he established the Chinese Contemporary Art Award, which has now been transformed into the Sigg Prize and is hosted now by the M+ Museum. The inaugural beneficiary, in fact, of this award a few weeks ago is Hong Kong-based artist Samson Young. And in addition to his activities with M+ on their board, he's also on the International Council of MoMA in New York, as well as the International Advisory Council of Tate. So an extraordinary group of guests. We're really thrilled and thank you all for joining us today. In terms of housekeeping, we have an hour. We'll be discussing a number of different topics amongst ourselves for the first 40 or so minutes and then open ultimately to questions from our global audience. Please make sure to submit, for those of you listening on Zoom, to the Q&A function on your screen. I'll try to get through as many of those questions as I can before we're done. And lastly, before turning over to the panelists, I want to mention that once again, we have a simultaneous Mandarin audio translation, which is also accessible using the translation button on the bottom of your screen. So now over to the panelists. I'm going to begin with all of you to ask each of you to provide a response to the fundamental question of why collect now, which is the title of our panel. We'll start in a geographic arc with Carlos in Peru and pass through Jill, Füsun, and ultimately Uli, who can straddle, I think, both European and Asian perspectives here. So Carlos, over to you. Why collect now? And more specifically, I suppose, why support art right now when so many other urgent needs are needing for our collective attention?
Well, thank you, Noah, for the invitation. And hello to everyone. I think collecting is a journey. My journey begins in 2003 when I bought my first painting, and I got the best advice: buy your own generation or the following ones so you can see them grow. That's why I'm trying to build a body of work of the young generation and trying to go to see them. I begin in Peru, then Latin America, and then I become much more global. And collecting is not only the process of acquisition, collecting is connecting. We are part of an ecosystem. We need to interact permanently with galleries, curators, artists, and it's very important to support them. Not only now that we are having very challenging times, but the relations with institutions is very important. As you mentioned, I am related to the Mali in Peru, the New Museum, which is a fantastic institution, but we need to be very close to the galleries, and especially under current situation. But I like to buy young talent globally. I like to do a lot of research. I like to connect, to speak to everyone. I like to move myself and trying to find where is the thinking process. And as you mentioned, Latin America is a great place in the world. Lots of things happening because our countries has been facing lots of challenges of political, social, economic instability, and our artists have been adapted to change, which makes them produce fantastic work. So it's a region that all of us we should be looking. But also, art is not related only to a place. Art is global. Good artists are around the world, and I'm trying to find them. And for me, it's amazing experience. It's a living experience to get connected with the artists. I just went to the Dakar Summit, which was an amazing experience, great curatorial show. And also I meet artists of different parts of the world, and I'm trying to connect. There is an artist in Bangladesh, for example, I met there, and I'm connecting her with galleries, and she will have a show next year in Brazil. So we have a role of connectors. And I love when I see a talent. I remember I see 2 years ago a work of a mermaid in a laundry machine, and I got it. And now you see that work moving all over, and the idea is to share. You know, we need to share knowledge and information. It's very important with collectors when we share what we are looking, because we help to move the wheel. And I said it's very important. You mentioned initially, we built an initiative in Peru called Artus to give scholarships to young artists. We have agreements with top art residencies in the world, like Delfina Foundation, Wheels, Gasworks, Pivot. And it's also very important to give access the artists to this kind of programs, because you change their lives. When I spoke with the artists who came after the residence to Lima, they mentioned me how they improve their thinking process, they live in community with other artists, they connect with other realities, with curators, and we need to help give opportunity to the artists. And it's an important way of support them. I would like to mention something that happened 2 weeks ago, for example, like creating community. A friend in Brazil called me one day in the morning, telling me, I would like to do a seminar about electronic art. So that morning I got 5 collectors in Peru, 5 collectors in Brazil. And then he proposed to invite institutions, curators, and artists. So we are having right now a digital seminar with different parts of community where we are sharing knowledge. And it came when we were at home during this period of time. And it's different ways of making the wheel move, sharing knowledge.
Cool. I think that's a really great reminder of the basic collaborative and shared spirit of why we all do this. Jill, over to you. And I think, you know, and posing this to you, I'm particularly curious to hear your perspective on more on the education front, perhaps.
Thank you, Noah. I think that a lot of people right now are focused on the broader art world, but the ecosystem is way more than lots of people that have thought about up until this point. It includes art schools, artists, galleries, small and medium-sized institutions, and large institutions. And we need to figure out how to support all of this. I've been on the board of CalArts now for about, I guess, 7 or 8 years. And I've been working on a project for the last 2 years with them to raise scholarship dollars called 50+50. It will be the 50th anniversary of Chenard, the 100th anniversary of Chenard, the predecessor institution to CalArts, and the 50th anniversary of CalArts this coming year. And we've commissioned 50 alumni artists to do editions and small limited series to raise scholarship dollars. It's a way for the older, more established artists to give back to the community that they came from. And I think most people have been thinking about in this pandemic the professional arts world, but if we don't support our art schools, there won't be that next generation of artists. We've already seen one art school fail in the United States in the last few months, San Francisco Art Institute. And I'm concerned that with this pandemic, there are more and more students that need scholarship money to go to school, and that this is where, if they can't, this will really impact the next generation of artists. CalArts has been sort of the leader in the LA art world in that, almost every gallery in LA, either historically or currently, represents a CalArts graduate. And this won't continue unless we also support the art world. The greater art world that includes the art schools. And I'm, hoping that people will, think about the educational component. Arts education is incredibly expensive to deliver. And, you don't have large lecture halls in art schools. So this generation of artists really needs to be able to afford school.
Thanks, Jill. Füsun, I'm curious to hear your perspective coming out of Istanbul, coming out of Turkey, both as it relates to your ongoing activities with Saha, but also more generally.
With Saha, let me start with Saha. We started 9 years ago to support the ecosystem over here because we have really wonderful institutions, museums, and art institutions, but there was no government support or no support for the artists, therefore their participation in the international non-profit exhibitions. So if, let's say, if they're invited to Venice, there were no funds for them to realize their projects. So we started Saha so that we provide funds for them to be included in the international cultural dialogue. That was the aim. And since 9 years, we started with 9 people, now we are 105 people, and we are providing artists, curators, art historians, those kind of funds so that they're included in the nonprofit exhibitions all over the world. But why today it's more essential than ever, I totally agree with my friends, but on the other hand, I think today's urgencies is also very political. And today, in the times of despair and so much uncertainty, so much fear about the future, and if we lose dialogue through art, we will leave the field to, those xenophobic, hateful speeches. And we see more and more, communities, people are trying to close the communities, but art is the best way of communicating with others, with other cultures, and understand each other. And we need to keep it up. We need to sustain that dialogue because today we are going through something that we could never imagine, and art, I believe, is more than essential. And today, when all exhibitions are canceled or delayed, you would rightfully ask me, what are you doing if you're supporting the international exhibitions? First, we serve both to our members to keep them engaged. This is really a big task, so that we are all in the same page with the same motivation to support. So we are collecting donations from them, annual support, so that we have our budget for annual budget to support artists. And then we have another responsibility to the artists. So we need to keep those two communities, each of them active, engaged, sustainable. For our members, we are trying to, our team is trying to curate a program every single day. We have a wonderful, very active WhatsApp group where every single day they are curating a content. So, you know, nowadays information is flowing in from all over the world. So they are curating that information, let's say, customizing for our members, and then sending everyday information to our members. Then there is a dialogue created among our members. When they receive those emails, when they receive an online exhibition, an artist talk, then that dialogue keeps them engaged. And we all start talking about that. And for the artists, we leave them our space. For instance, they took over our Instagram account. And for a few days, one artist takes over our Instagram account and create content for our Instagram account, whatever he wants. He shows his works, her works, or reads some poetry, you know, makes a performance. Or we have also a program called Saha on Air, where from all over the world, they're living in different parts of the world, but they're all from Turkey. And they are, for instance, they are showing their studios, or they are talking about what they are thinking, their fears, their emotions. So that kind of content keeps our members together. And for the artists whose exhibitions are canceled, whose, you know, or postponed, or they don't know what's going to happen, we are going to announce a fund. If the exhibition is canceled, but they already started realizing that and the work is stopped, we will provide funds for them to finish that work, so that it is not, you know, the old work is not
specifically related to what's happening now. Is that
exactly?
Yeah.
So many things are canceled, and they really put an effort to it, and they really want to give birth to that idea. So we will provide funds for that. And also we will provide funds for the artists who are thinking about today, reacting today, and doing works related to today. So there will be an application process for both. And we are, instead of those canceled or postponed exhibitions, we are going to provide support to those exhibitions or those artworks for the timing. But for me, as I said, it is more essential to provide support to art at this moment, more than ever, because the dialogue through art and culture is so essential. We shouldn't leave this stage.
Thanks, Füsun. Uli, over to you, and I think here perhaps more on the role of major institutions and institution building and preservation at this moment.
Yes and no. If you refer to the M+ Museum, it's not yet up and running, which for some, you know, is a blessing because it means less dramatic cost cuts. But going forward, of course, budgets have to be cut substantially in order to survive, even though Hong Kong has been a very affluent city, but is now in a difficult corner. But say, that means I have to talk more maybe about collecting and about your question, why collect? My first reflex was, why not collect? Collecting is a state of mind, I think. And have you ever seen anyone unlearn collecting? I have not met yet a collector who did that. So, but, you know, here is COVID. It means, in my case, for instance, less time and less money to spend on irrational art purchases, if I may call it that way, because I have to take care of companies. Now, that makes you rethink what you have been doing in the past. rethink the value chain of collecting, because it's now, right now, reorganized. I mean, it starts with knowing about a work and then meeting the work physically, analyzing, thinking about it, purchasing it, then display or storage, and maybe sell or donate. Now, all of a sudden, this chain is interrupted because we can't meet physically that particular work. So you start to think, and now maybe you look away, you start to think, do you really have to own art? You know, it brings out these questions. There is such abundance of information we receive now, much more than ever, on artworks. There are so many opportunities to see art, read, hear podcasts like ours, that you may start to think, you know, can I not have the new vistas of the world and the experience and the knowing and the surprise and all that an artwork may provide without owning it? So that, I think, is an outcome for me personally of this. And institutions, we talked about them plus. If we talk about Chinese art and also some other Asian countries, the issue is that there is very little, if any, support for contemporary and experimental art. So the artists are even more exposed than, say, in our countries, where there are established funding, you know, instruments, etc., etc. So Asia is in a difficult corner right now.
Thanks, Uli. I think that your vision for new trends and trajectories that can potentially emerge out of this, this idea of collecting and actual ownership around certain things, now that more and more is streamed and shared digitally, is really interesting. It also a little bit, I think, relates to some of what Carlos was talking about at the outset, which is around building collecting communities and the journey of sharing and interacting with others. So I'd maybe pose a question, you know, back to you, and I'll address this maybe firstly with Carlos. You know, there's been a lot of, in parallel, Uli, I think with what you were just driving at, a lot of discussion, certainly coming out of the gallery community around different collaborative efforts. These are efforts like the LA platform initiative that's just gone online, that Jeffrey Deitch spoke about recently in his conversation with Mark Spiegler on this channel. And there are others as well. Kondo, of course, which was already in motion before the COVID crisis. So there were already some emergent changes happening in the world of both exhibition staging and in terms of how galleries work together. I'd love to hear, Carlos, from you, an extension of this as you see roles of collaboration potentially evolving here, and even, you know, potentially new forms of patronage coming out of this moment as different types of artwork and different types of communities are built.
I think we are living moments of change, and the secret is, how do we adapt to change? You know, galleries, artists, everyone is going through transformation process, but collaboration will be the key to go to next steps. We can have different kind of collaborations. You said now the galleries are getting in different platforms to show their works, big galleries helping small galleries. So there are major changes on how we interact. But lots of people are thinking we should go all digital. We cannot forget that on the art world, the human side is something very important. We need to build trust with galleries. We need to understand what's going on with the artists. And it's really important how we connect. And I think all those initiatives will help us to go to the next levels. But we should never forget the human side, and also how the different parts of the ecosystems should be articulated all together.
Thanks, Carlos. I think related to that, I mean, you brought up the digital, right? This is, of course, something, I mean, different types of digital platforms have been around for many years now. The e-commerce journey of the art market has also been around for some time, but of course it's accelerated massively in this COVID environment. Füsun, I would love to ask you, and perhaps Jill follow with you, what your opinions are of some of these latest digital developments. Carlos just touched on them. We're all aware of them. Art Basel's online viewing rooms will come in the next few weeks, following on what we've already done in March with the cancellation of our Hong Kong show. Füsun, can you maybe talk a little bit about how you see this journey, both in the near term, but also more broadly?
I'm a bit skeptic about that. At the moment, as Carlos says, it is physical. We need to be there, see it. It's not ordering a toilet paper to the market. It is, you need to see the dimensions, your reaction to it, So for me, seeing art digitally is not satisfactory. On the other hand, there is still too much pretense on that topic. For instance, I can give you one. We are talking about transparency. We are talking about, democratization and everything. But just recently, a few months ago, it was not an art fair, but it was a gallery making a viewing room and selling artworks at exhibition, online exhibition. And it's a mega gallery with many locations all over, but it's a gallery that I don't have very close connections. And I saw an artwork and I asked them for more information, no reply. There wasn't any price on the website, but I received with my name on it, one of those template emails with my name on it, dear Füsun, blah, blah, blah. And then I went into the viewing room and I asked more information, no reply. Most probably someone sitting in front of that computer didn't find me eligible enough to reply. So it is not encouraging yet, but there is much to grow, and I believe it will continue and it will grow, but it is very immature at the moment, I believe.
Jill, do you want to add to that at all?
Absolutely. And I had exactly the same experience about pushing the inquiry button and not getting a reply, and pushing it again and not getting a reply, and pushing it again. And I have to say, some of that has been, I think that things are going to people's spam with this. So I was talking to someone the other day and said, you guys need to put like phone numbers to call on these websites, because the email thing is not actually working particularly well. I go back and forth with Peter, my husband, because we collect together, and he is anti-digital imagery. He wants to only see things in person. I'm a little bit more flexible than he is, although I have to say I would 99% of the time want to see things, in person, not digitally. And in fact, on one of the other websites, I saw a piece I liked. I called the gallery. I asked them if it was in New York. It was an international gallery. They said no, it was in Mexico. And I said, oh, well, I would have bought it if I could have, or I would have put it on hold if I could see it in New York. They immediately said, if we don't sell it, we'll bring it to New York for you to see. But I've had sort of a slightly different experience as well, because with this 50+50 project, we were given a booth in one of the major art fairs. And so it's been interesting being on both sides of the equation. And I would say we did moderately well, but I think if we had been in person, we would have done better. I mean, we had one of the last, series that John Baldessari did and, you know, an amazing photograph by Mary J. Blige by Karen May Weems. I mean, things that in person would have done better than it would have, that I think it would have done digitally. So it's been interesting being on both sides of this digital divide. Some of my friends that are art dealers are like, ha ha ha, now you see what we go through. But I think it's tough to buy art online. And the only things we're buying are things where it's an artist who we really know the work already. I would be hesitant to try someone that I hadn't seen the works in person, especially since, you know, a lot of the focus of our collection is sculpture and digital media. So I think the digital, I think, are easier to do, but the, you know, sculpture is hard to buy from JPEGs or, you know, online works.
Uli, Carlos, do you want to offer a counterpoint to any of this, or do you broadly agree?
I have
maybe Uli first, and then Carlos.
Since years, I have bought quite a number of works online, but yes, I mainly knew the artist, so I could somehow extrapolate what it's going to be. But still, there will be some, you know, deceptions and maybe some positive surprises, inevitably. My hope is to a degree, say, virtual reality, but also I don't have any illusions when we talk about complex installations, etc. I have had discussions with, you know, operators of this stuff. They cannot really remodel maybe a solid state, say, object, yes, but when it goes beyond that, we still don't have the solution. So I wait for this, but I think it's a matter of time. We can see more. That doesn't replace, of course, what everyone else said earlier. It would be so much nicer to see an artwork, but if we can't, we can't. So then maybe we have to help. So what I'm doing really to support some galleries, some artists, I may buy a minor piece price-wise, you know, so the surprise, you know, I can accept the risk.
Carlos, do you want to add to that?
Yes, considering that I live in Peru, I'm a little far away of what's happening abroad, in New York or London or different shows around the world. I have been buying by PDF by the last years, and the eye is like a muscle, and you develop a digital eye, but I can do that with galleries I know and I trust, because you know the programs, and we need to take some risks. It was funny, there was a show of a young artist in New York, and he does laser works. And I bought it like by the image, and then when I saw it really installed, it was an amazing surprise living with the work. So we need to take the risk, in my case.
No, I need to make a confession. Okay.
I know that.
Because, you know, this is in general, I'm talking about the general attitude that I'm not sure about. But on the other hand, just 2 weeks ago, I bought an artwork from JPEG, from Vienna, from an artist that I have been waiting for the work that fits my collection. So without seeing it, I just recently, a few weeks ago, bought one. So it is a combination of things. As you say, the artists we know and the galleries that we trust, it works well. But when you, as Jill and I had the same experience, you send an application or you just ask them for more information, and if they don't, so I think galleries should make their homework better on that.
Well, it's about everybody getting to understand the new rules of the game.
And we need to adapt as well.
Yeah.
So,
I saw an interesting idea with a gallery who would provide you the artwork for like 6 months, and then, you know, physically, and then you decide if you purchase or not. Maybe that's one way to go.
Great way.
Let's shift here. Jill. Yeah.
And I also think that it's an obligation for all of us as collectors to be purchasing now. I mean, we've bought, We've bought several things. But as I said, I think I agree with the group in that, it's either from a gallery that I know really well, or it's an artist whose work that I feel comfortable with because I've looked at enough, even if it's not in my collection already, it's someone whose work I have looked at and understand and see a great piece and say, okay, now it's time to pull the trigger. And it helps the galleries. It helps the galleries and it helps the artists. And it's that ecosystem again that we have to all support.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, one of the emerging, I think to sort of build off of that, one of the emerging discussion points in our sphere, but also more generally as travel restrictions have come into place and the world has shuttered, is a general notion that for some time to come, communities will focus efforts at a more local level, right? That things turn inward for some period of time and then go outward again. And, there's growing discussion and chatter around this. Uli, I pose to you off the bat here, how you feel about this. You're somebody in particular that's led a profoundly international career, made pioneering discoveries in a very different part of the world. And I wonder how you feel about this tension that's now emerging between the local versus the global.
Well, there is such tension in terms of art making and so in terms of art distribution. If we talk about art making, I can see this that, yes, for instance, in Chinese art, you have one group of artists, they want to join this global mainstream and, and say survive or perform in the global mainstream art. And then you have these artists, they return to their roots, they sort of use their roots as a resource, and that art may look distinctly different. So in our production, I can see two trends. And in the art distribution, of course, now the situation is very difficult in China. There is a lot of censorship. So many artists are not able to show their works or only very selectively. So yes, there is a global scene, but the local scene is restrained.
Carlos, do you want to add to that?
Yes. Well, going local, for example, in Peru, we have a fantastic generation of contemporary artists, but our ecosystem is very small. So I'm trying to think globally, and there are different countries around the world where you will find great critical thinking and good artists coming up. So unfortunately, I have to look here, support here, but also go on a global basis.
Maybe a related topic is shifting taste or trends. We've sort of danced around it a little bit. If we look back historically into other major seismic shifts in the marketplace, and I'm thinking here specifically, and there are many unknowns yet. We don't quite know what the art market is going to look like over the next 6 or 12 or 24 months. But if things do change and taper off somewhat, there's the possibility surely of things looking different, of a new normal emerging on the other side. The last major art market crash wasn't really the 08-09 crash. We'd really have to go back to the late 80s bubble when, in New York at the time, it was a very male-dominated world. It was dominated largely by painting. Impressionist and modern prices were leading the auction sales room. And what emerged out of that in the 90s was a much more experimental, a much more pluralistic, a much more globally focused art world. This is a question, maybe Jill, I'll start with you here, and then we'll then open to some questions from our viewers. But do you see a potential shift or transition happening as we reemerge here, in which not just practices, but possibly tastes in a more wholesale way will begin to emerge?
I think that's an absolute possibility. What I've been really amazed at is some of my friends who are artists have been sending me the work that they're doing while inside and locked up. And the work is astonishing. I mean, really, I'm already seeing huge leaps and bounds in people's practices that are incredible. So I think that this is definitely going to happen. I do think that the art market is ready for this kind of shakeup. I think the market has become too market driven, you know, to price, you know, like what's hot, what's not, flipping, all of those kinds of things, that I think for people who are true collectors, we actually sort of are looking forward to spending more time in galleries and looking at works locally. I mean, people used to say to me, God, you're one of the few collectors that actually come to the galleries anymore. I think that's really important. I don't know how you can be a collector just seeing a work by an artist. I think you really have to understand where the art is coming from and how important seeing a total group of you know, a year's body of work or 2 years body of work, to really understand it's not just a pretty picture, that there's something, you know, there's a reason why there's works that are better than others. And if you're just seeing one of something, you're never doing that. Now, what I am going to miss about, you know, the traveling is, you know, we do a lot of work commissioning artists, and that's, you know, it's hard to do without spending time with those artists. In fact, I find it may be impossible. So I'm worried about that, and what that means with what's going on in the world now. I mean, we already have 2 projects that were supposed to go in this summer that probably won't go in this summer. They won't go in till the artists can travel.
Does anybody else want to offer a riposte or an extension of that? Füsun, you're smiling.
Yeah, to tell the truth, I'm really quite afraid about this new trend going local. I always believed that art is the antithesis of a closed society. And now everyone is talking about going local. Okay, I understand from a gallery's point of view or a collector's point of view, but what about institutional representation? If the institutions go local, then it is much worse than closing the borders, closing the minds. It will become another pandemic. So I'm really afraid of this new trend if it becomes at the institutional level. And of course, we would all want to go back to traveling, but this is something else. But the institutions should still be able to provide that international dialogue and cross-cultural representation. That's I'm very, very afraid of. And this is, I see more and more. And I hear from the museum directors or curators that they are more and more thinking of doing local exhibitions, doing much on digital media, and also they say this is the end of solo shows. It will be more group shows. So that kind of shift, I am not sure I'm ready to digest it yet.
Right. Let's go to some questions from the audience now. There's an interesting one here around why we need to save institutions. This is sort of a controversial question, of course, but let's lead here. Why can't we let cultural institutions fail? This is obviously a big topic in the world of big business, but clearly one here as well. And on the one hand, we may assume it to be obvious as to why this is the case. On the other hand, I think it's quite a fundamental and interesting question. Uli, do you want to maybe offer a short answer to that, or?
Okay. I think the question can only relate to contemporary art, and that also answers the question. I guess if we look back further, where is the memory of previous times? It's still the museum. If there is no museum, how would we know, what other cultures or our cultures in earlier centuries did? So I think there's no way around museum.
Carlos, do you want to add to that at all?
Well, museums are part of our history, as Uli says. No, for example, in Peru, we have 4,000 histories of textiles, our heritage. Museums are the only way to preserve it and to show it for the next generations. Contemporary is the new part, but we have all our history there.
But the contemporary will be history for our children, for our grandchildren. So we need to collect today for the future generations.
Let's yep, Jill.
No, I also think that I don't think they should disappear, but I think there's going to be a way that these smaller institutions help each other. There's a group of 15 small nonprofits in New York that all have budgets between $1 and $3 million. And this pandemic has been really tough on them. They've raised, with all of the 15 institutions, $1.8 million to cover their staff salaries and their general operating budgets. And, maybe some of them won't make it in the end, but I would hate to think that just because you're small, or even because you're large and you don't have a big endowment, that this is going to be the end of it. It would be really, really sad to see these institutions, perish in this.
We're getting a number of questions here around purpose and social responsibility, which are, these are currencies and trends that go well outside of the art world. I'd love to hear, starting maybe from you, Füsun, how you see the role of social engagement and purpose and some shifts coming out of your role as a leading collector and patron of the arts as it relates to this discussion.
I believe
or do you think that that's necessary at all?
Of course, I believe it is necessary. And this became my main mission, my purpose, and creating awareness towards supporting art, supporting critical thinking, supporting experimentation. But we know that many artists do not have funds to do it by themselves. So supporting that ecosystem, that environment, she is mentioning ecosystem. I think it's the most important thing to support the ecosystem. So this is very essential. And for me, I always see my role as creating that atmosphere that people start thinking about support, not necessarily our organization, but other organizations as well. Everyone should find it close to their heart and support that. So this, because it's only the civil society who can open those doors. And the governments are not that much interested in that. So at this stage, I believe it's very, very important. If that was the question.
I think that's the question. Yeah, okay. I think it's going there. It's also potentially a question around a certain shift in emphasis. Does anybody else want to add to that before I go on?
Yeah, can I just, say one thing here? I mean, there's been a really interesting group of not-for-profits that are raising money directly for artists, for this Artist Relief Fund, and they're giving $5,000 to worthy artists. And, the arts community is really hurting right now. There's, people can't pay their rent, they can't buy their medicine, they can't feed their children. And this Artist Relief Fund has really made a difference, these are $5,000 grants and they've raised $12.5 million. So it's a lot of people they're giving money to. But the other thing that I found really fascinating, and this will probably just be a local kind of experience, but last week or the week before last, because I've lost track of time at this point, they did on television a national high school graduation. And what was really fascinating to me to watch was all of the things that were highlighted were things in the arts. It was musical groups and dance groups and visual arts groups. It wasn't, that this is a visual and artistic culture, even when we don't think it is. And so as much as it's, we all want to give to social services, which of course we're, at least in my case, I'm doing, but it's also, this is a social service to the arts community. And we have to think about that as well.
There are a number of questions coming from viewers in Asia. Uli, this one's directed to you, which is just some insight really on how your journey began, because I think certainly from my perspective, and I think many, we learned just a huge amount from collectors such as yourselves. But one of the things that's not always so clear is how you began, or how we all began this journey. And so Uli, for you specifically, what led you to start collecting Chinese art at the beginning of your journey, and how have you seen that world transform over that time? Clearly it's transformed profoundly. And if you could comment on that in just a few short minutes.
Well, I came to China totally ignorant about its culture, late 70s. So I was thinking of ways and means, to cure my ignorance and to see more of a reality than I could see as a business person. That's why I thought, my encounter with contemporary art would remedy this, but at first it wasn't so, but later, yes, it worked. And that was a very important access to Chinese reality to collect art. And while doing this, I realized that no one else is doing this in a even remotely systematic way. So I changed my focus and built this substantial collection with a view to create a document that could then be a testimony of the development of Chinese contemporary art, which doesn't exist elsewhere. But that's maybe a very special case and may not be, to be emulated by other collectors starting their collection.
There's a number of questions, thank you, Uli, around collecting and changes during the current pandemic. Carlos, maybe this question is best suited for you. What are your thoughts on the undervalued side of the market right now? Are there opportunities within this? Jill laid the gauntlet down about the fundamental need to support artists now, and clearly this question starts from that. But are there more specific piece of advice you could potentially offer to people around certain opportunities that may emerge out of this with regard to supporting emerging artists particularly?
I think I'm buying for the long run. I'm trying to build the body of works thinking in 20 years. So I'm not thinking about pricing. I think you mentioned before there will be some corrections in the market. We have lived in some crazy marketing experiences. Young artists just went out of college and suddenly their prices goes 1, 2, 3, 4 times after 2 years in a fair. I think we will face those kind of corrections, but we should be looking for critical minds, good thinking. Like I always trying to find artists and speak. I know I call friends, I sleep few hours. So I call people all over the world at 5 in the morning in Lima when I wake up, and I like to have lots of information. And I think we need to find good artists and good galleries. There are very good galleries all over the world that they do their homework. And as we mentioned before, we have the trust with them. They send the PDF and we know that we can trust them because they are looking to do to create an institutional support for those young talents. So we will see them in the future, because it's very easy to buy an artist and he will disappear. So I think we should do the homework.
Füsun, maybe building on that, there's another question here, which I think relates to what Carlos is saying, which is from one of our audience members that asked for the difference between the criteria that you apply to purchase an individual artwork versus building a collection. Can you weigh in on that?
Can you open that? Purchasing.
I guess, is there a different criteria you apply to build or to purchasing a singular artwork versus building an actual collection?
We never thought of building a collection. We still don't want to call ourselves collectors. By time, works accumulated, but it is always, because we never buy through advisors. We never listen to others. It is not something that others tell us that we should look at to. We do it with just two of us, my husband and I. It is just our own, because we never aimed to build a collection. We aimed to live with art. So we don't have that much of a statement-making collection. It accumulated by time. So there is no difference for me. But what we look at, there was a moment that we decided to change our direction, which was, it was around early 2000s, late 19, yes, early 2000s. And at that moment, we decided we want to look to art of today, the art which is witnessing today, instead of looking to past, the art of today, so that when we just go out from this world, what we will leave behind to our kids will be our way of looking things. So it was not collection building.
So we're coming on time here. We have a few moments left. So I'll ask each of you this question and just go around the horn. Maybe if you could focus your answers and keep them to a minute each. What advice or opportunities for younger collectors do you have, or collectors that are just beginning their journey in the present moment? Is there advice that you've learned over the years, or opportunities that you see before you as the art world continues to shift and emerge that you'd like to pass on? And then in addition to that, there are probably 10 questions here regarding the artworks that are behind each of you. And so if you could let our viewers know what's behind you as a parting salvo as well. So I'm sort of looking at my screen here. So Jill, I'll start with you. If you could offer your parting salvo on this topic and let us know what's behind you.
So behind me is one of Charles Gaines's Central Park trees. I'm sitting in my dining room, and everything in all the artwork in my dining room has to do with nature, which has been an incredibly comforting thing to have in quarantine. So even though I can't go outside, I can still look at trees and clouds and plants. So that's been really wonderful. My closing salvo to new collectors would be: collect with your eyes, not with your ears. We've never, like Füsun, we've never bought because it's the right thing to buy or it's the hot thing to buy. We've bought because it's something that Peter and I love, and we have a very quirky collection because of it. I mean, in the 80s, we were buying Cobra School paintings, which, may have been okay in Europe, but in the US, nobody was looking at Cobra School paintings. And so people come into our apartment and say, oh, you have like a collection that's really, for a major collector, I walk through your apartment and I don't know half of the things in your apartment. I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, yeah.
Carlos?
Which is good.
I totally agree with you. It happens to me. People, friends come to my house. Oh, I don't know this artist. Doesn't matter. Discover it. The best advice you can give to someone who is beginning is train your eye, buy what you like, go to galleries, try to have a methodology, like watch the resume, when he graduated, how he has been moving, where he's going, because with a methodology and information, you will avoid mistakes probably, but if you buy what you like, all of us, we have made many mistakes, but we need to have lots of information and train ourselves.
And what's behind you, Carlos?
Oh, it's a work of Michael Riddle and Garth Weiser.
Thanks. Uli?
I start with the work behind me. It's a very large painting from Cultural Revolution period, and an elevator factory in China gave it as a gift to me. Now, collecting, I would advise, see every art you can see good art and see bad art. I love to see bad art, I mean, so-called bad art or art that's not meaningful. How could we otherwise build a distinction? And it's normal that, we all buy a few things and we are first accumulators. But to become a collector, I think you need to define a focus of what you are doing. And that focus requires, of course, then discipline, but it may help you build a real collection rather than accumulation.
Thanks, Uli. And Füsun, lastly to you.
I have the same words with Jill. Don't, I can't help to repeat it. Buy with your own eyes instead of your ears. And don't go for what you are told to like. Look at it mindfully, carefully, consciously. And why do you like it? Why not this one next to it, but this one do you like it? And how it is, what is the purpose behind it? What does it say to you? And what does it going to say to others? And so you need to think of, and my advice usually, you won't like it, Noah, because I tell people when they go to Art Basel for the first time, I tell them, don't buy or just buy with fun money. Just look at it and go to the museums. Spend one day in Art Basel or two, but go to the museums, because during that fair, all museums are putting their best shows, and you need to go and see those shows that are made just for that week and best shows of the year. So just do with your fun money. Okay, you buy. So that one was an example of that. It was our first Art Basel, 1999, and at the beginning everything seems nice, but it's not about, as Uli says, accumulation of nice things. Art has a better purpose. It's not about collecting nice objects. It should have a deeper meaning. So everything seems nice. So it was just for fun, and I highly recommend not to buy the first year. I'm sorry, Noah, forgive me.
So on that final note, and I'll say this, it doesn't upset me at all. And in fact, it's much the same advice that we give many people. I think Art Basel is clearly a commercial platform, but it's also a cultural platform. And I think for those that are coming for the first time, and those that come regularly, making connections and the ability to see a gallery or meet a gallery, an artist or a curator at one of our shows, and then visit that gallery or artist in Istanbul or in Beijing or Hong Kong or New York on one's travels is what it's all about also. So I think that's certainly how we see ourselves. And I think one of the great things that Art Basel has done over the years is be able to play into that as we, in our own way, support galleries and help support the broader arts ecosystem. So on that note, many thanks to everybody for joining us from all around the world. Thank you to those that submitted questions. I know there are many more. I can see a chat function that popped up to 62 now. Here, we didn't obviously get through all of those questions, but keep them coming, and be more time and ways to engage with them in the future. If you'd like to revisit this talk, it'll soon be online on Art Basel's YouTube channel. Next Thursday, I'm delighted to hand the platform back over to Mark Spiegler, our global director, who's going to be in conversation with 3 extraordinary artists, Miriam Benani, Theaster Gates, and Yuk King Tan from Hong Kong, who will be discussing new work that they've been making during the global pandemic. For updates on this series, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Weibo, and WeChat. And a big thanks again to everybody that's joined from all over the world, and especially to the 4 of you. It's been a great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep safe and healthy.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.